Now, on the newsroom today, I have Senator Enoch Wambua of Kitui County and journalist Tom Osanjo as we look into the question of the media and elections. This is on the backdrop of what is known as the fall of the IEBC and, of course, matters that surround what is happening in the country right now. So welcome, gentlemen, Senator Enoch Wambua, Kitui County, and Tom Osanjo. Thank you for joining us this morning. Let's just start with basically what is on the headlines today, and that is to do the IEBC and whether we have done justice to the IEBC, this particular IEBC, and the election, the commissions that run the elections generally, because we seem to be having a cycle that keeps repeating itself. I'll start with you, Tom.
Thank you, Mike. In my opinion, I think IEBC as constituted is a politician's tool. Every politician will always have an interest on who should be on IEBC team. I'm sure even Enoch here must be very happy that some people have taken off or some people will be coming in.
Because of political interest.
Of course. To me, that's the biggest problem. Actually, it is not as independent as it should be. Yeah.
But question here being how we have told the story of IEBC and the commissions as the newsroom, as reporters, as journalists, have we been able to identify what really bedevils us when it comes to the IEBC or the commissions that run the elections?
In my opinion, from the stories I'm reading, is that the reporters speak to IEBC commissioners who all have interest. Nobody has really ever told the story of what is the rot at IEBC, because we all know there's a rot there.
Okay.
A big one.
A big one. Yeah. Senator, you're privileged by virtue of the fact that you have been in the newsroom, you know how the dynamics work, you know some of the challenges that we go through, but equally you threw your heart into politics, and congratulations, I guess, in order you made it as senator, and you're now able to look at it from the other side. So your comments, maybe your opening remarks in, first of all, our coverage of the electoral commissions.
Thank you, Mike. What I would say about the coverage of the big story unfolding in IEBC today is that in terms of direct reporting, I think media has done a good job. But mainstream media on this matter is following new media. Social media is way ahead of the game. So the stories that we are telling today in mainstream media have already been told. As a journalist of long and good standing, I would say the challenge is always to tell the story behind the story. And I don't think so far on the coverage of IEBC, I don't think we've gotten there. There's a story that every morning I wake up, I want to read this story. I've not been able to read it anywhere or watch it on any channel. The story about Ezra Chiloba. Who is Ezra Chiloba in his operations as the CEO of IEBC? And how comes that every time you touch Ezra Chiloba,
something happens.
Big things happen. Big things happen. Remember, when this guy was sent on compulsory leave last time, there was serious trouble within IEBC. Commissioners are pushing the chairman. The other day, last week, when he was sent on leave, 3 commissioners resigned. This is a guy who is sent on leave, and we are seeing him at the airport inspecting arrival of ballot boxes when he's supposed to be
on compulsory
leave. Who is Ezra Chiloba?
All right. Tom, why do you think we've not been able to tell that story? And evidently, there is Ezra Chiloba, there is Chebukati, and each holds quite a huge power in that commission. But now, the man Ezra Chiloba.
I think, as the senator just said, I think that the story that has not been told. I had the privilege when we were working at the People Weekly, and every Friday everybody would look forward to read the story, because apart from the reportage which Enoch talked about, we would go and find the story behind the story. Before that, we used to cover functions. Then you wait for JJ Kamodo to read what Kanu said, and this is the Kanu stand.
And that became the news.
And that became the news. But with my senior editor then, Mwenda Njoka, who is now the spokesperson, Minister of Interior, we would talk to MPs, the Jirongos of this world, the Rutos of this world. Then they tell you, actually there were fireworks in that meeting. It is not what Kamodo was saying. So I think that's what is lacking. But also I can't be so hard on my colleagues in the media. The resources are not there. Number two, as Enoch said, by the time you are reading the headline, if I log on to Facebook now, I'd have known what is happening around the world. So by tomorrow when I'm reading the paper, it's rather...
And I guess that's really meant to be our position, where we basically make our authority heard and known by virtue of the fact that we're not telling what everybody else has told. I think as media houses, really, we are no longer... okay, we are news centers, but we are more of context. You know, building the context behind that headline. What do you think is a challenge that has stopped us from doing that? You've mentioned resources, but one might say that is an excuse, because really going for a press conference and putting those microphones and having somebody read a statement, that is what everybody else will do.
The other issue also is that we don't dwell much on investigative journalism. We do much of reporting. He said, she said. And we really lack people who can go behind the scenes. And maybe it's because of investment, I don't know why, but we need people who can go behind the news and see, like Enoch was saying, who is Ezra Chiloba? Where was he born? Where did he go to school? What was his first job? Or how did he rise to be that powerful? Yeah, those kind of stories.
Okay, Senator?
But you see, the thing, and don't run away from this, because the thing is just about investment. And it is for journalists to push management to invest in investigative journalism. Because today, as things are, people are not consuming media to just to read about new things that have happened. No. People are consuming media either to be sure that what they know is what the journalists are reporting about, because they already know it, or to use the information that they get from media to solidify their own position about issues happening in society. Investigative journalism is the way of the future in media. It's expensive. Media houses need to put money in investigative journalism.
But Senator, you have worked in a media house, and you know sometimes some of the challenges one might go through, because the nature of an investigative story has several dynamics that make it difficult. One is the sources. Two is the cost of just having somebody following up a story, and it's not going to be air on the 9 o'clock news tomorrow. It may take time. There's also now the time element of having it done. So how do you overcome that?
Because the problem that we have, and I must admit that I could have been part of this problem, is that we have decided that only certain journalists can do investigative stories and others cannot. I think the challenge is to build capacity in the newsroom so that every person is trained to do investigations.
Or even to think.
Even to think in an investigative manner. So that every time there is a story running from different journalists, it cannot be that the only time that we do investigative journalism or we hear stories on investigations is when Kitonga has taken 3 weeks, 4 weeks to follow a story, and within the period of 4 weeks, nothing else is happening. We're just doing direct reporting.
All right, Tom, why haven't you, for instance, as somebody who's been in the media for a long time, ventured into investigative journalism, and what are some of the challenges that you have possibly faced as an individual?
First, sometimes the editors, like Mr. Wambua here, before he crossed over and joined,
politics.
joined the other team, if the editor does not see value in the reporters hears, then the reporters lose hope. And as he said, which I agree with, we should not have just, it's Michael Gitonga, who is the investigative guy. So if Michael Gitonga falls sick or goes on honeymoon, the investigative desk stops. You should have a pool of guys that, as the editor, you just know about 3 people are always working on one story. But then also in Kenya, the problem is their vested interests. The media owners, they are toes you can't touch. If you step on them, your job is on the line. Yeah, that's also a big, big issue in Kenyan media.
All right. Moving away from the IEBC, let's look at elections and how we cover elections. Senator, you were part of those who were in the election now with major interests, and of course you made it. Maybe your view and your comments on how the coverage was done. What are some of those things that possibly you're seeing as gaps while you are watching and thinking, why aren't I getting this information?
I think we have come a long way as media in this country in terms of coverage of elections. I want to take us back to the elections of 2007. I'll be blunt on this one. We were a bit reckless because we reported on everything that was happening. You know, we were a conveyor belt, and when I call Kitonga names, media will pick that and amplify it. We never sieved anything, and.
At what point do we sieve? Because again, one of the things that we're criticized for,
Yes.
and hopefully this should help us improve over time, is the fact that apparently we were keeping things. There's some areas where there was, say, violence that was erupting, and there are those who are saying, "Why is the media quiet? Have they been bought by the?"
That's where I'm coming, and that's where I'm coming. In 2007, there was no sieving. It was, we reported it as it was. And some people have argued, and this is a debate that really we must all participate in. Some people have argued that the media was as guilty as everyone else who contributed to the violence that we witnessed after the elections.
Right.
Then come 2013, and we were very measured, extremely measured, to the extent that, and this I will say, that in the morning of election day in 2013, there was serious violence in a region in Coast. People were attacked as early as 5:30 in the morning. And those reports came to our desks as editors that this has happened. Some security people have been attacked and actually killed. It's 5:30 in the morning, and you're asking yourself, okay, I have this story here. What would be the impact of this story on elections today if we say this number of security officers have been killed? And we call colleagues across the media houses, and everybody confirms, yes, I have this story, but what do we do with it? And there was consensus that, you know what, guys, in the best interest of peace in this country and this election, we cannot tell this story, at least not now.
The timing.
The timing. And that is where now the accusations came in. That, hey, you guys, you had information about so much that happened in these elections that you did not report. And then that brings me to the question that I've always asked myself, and I think we can talk about this. What is the place of patriotic journalism in the coverage of elections? And how do we even define that patriotism in journalism? Because broadly, patriotism is about loyalty to a country.
Right.
But there's a thin line. Where do you draw the line between loyalty to your country and loyalty to leadership? Well, those are two different things.
Okay, let me bring in Tom Osanjo on that. And a valid point and a good point you bring in there. What is your experience and what would you recommend as the line that you draw? Because there are two things here. Even politicians, the reason why they're under a huge spotlight is because whatever they say has a potential to trigger a reaction, especially when it comes to violence. Now, media has the same power. Let me bring to your attention or maybe remind you of when schools were being burnt sometime last year. It was accused, and I don't know, this is again up for debate, that, or rather it was stated that part of the reason why they were flaring left, right, and center is because the more the schools saw other schools doing that, it gave them a sense of power, a sense of, oh, this is what's happening in other schools, and it kept flaring. So at what point do we draw that line, if at all we draw the line?
Let me start from election coverage. I think we've come from long way, especially for print journalists. I covered my first elections in 1997. And back then, mostly you rely on politicians, like Mheshimiwa here, gives you a lift to go to his function. You'll come back in his car. You can't go ahead and write a bad story or whatever penned there about him. I mean, it's just, you can't.
You can't.
Because you'll need him again next week. But I've seen more investment where now journalists are being empowered to go and look for the story, especially during election time. I'm very much impressed with security for journalists, that you can go in a car and take off when the situation needs. You don't have to rely on politicians. Having said that, I think that journalists have the power to shape opinion. Like you're talking about schools burning down. It's a thin line. If a school is burned down in Kwale, should we report it or shouldn't we report it? As an editor, I owe my readers the story, or my viewers. I have to tell the story. But also, then there's also the issue of patriotism.
But my question is, how do you draw at what point do you draw that line? Because yes, you are the watchman of the people, as it were, to ensure that you report how things are happening. I mean, that's one of our core reasons why we are there. But question is, in a situation where it is likely to have a negative reaction, what do we do with it?
That's where now your sense of the gatekeeper comes in. Is this story... There are a lot of things that happen in this country, but I've been a news editor. I've sat at the news desk. If I write this story, if this story runs, what will be the effect? There's some stories you just decide to kill. You just say no.
And who makes that call?
As the editor. Yeah, as the editor. It's a tough call. Sometimes you want to run a story, then you receive a phone call. That story should not run. You wonder, how did this man know about the story I have? Yeah. I also think journalists themselves are their enemies, if Enoch would agree with me.
Senator. I've always advocated for this principle that reporters should not edit stories or censor themselves at source.
At source.
Yes. Reporters should just bring it on. Bring your story. Bring the whole thing as it is. And because there are different levels of checking on facts and accuracy and impact of story, then another person will make that decision. Because if you encourage reporters then to censor themselves at source, we'll probably have no story at all.
Right.
On the matter of drawing the line, Mike, some things about patriotic journalism are very interesting. Reminds me, very briefly, in the year, I think it was 2003, yes, 2003, a very popular group in the US, the singers, called Chicks, they go on a tour of Europe. And while on the tour, their leader says something to the effect that, the group comes from Texas, to the effect that we are actually ashamed that we are here performing in Europe, and our president actually comes from Texas. We are ashamed that our president comes from Texas. That was Bush. And there was such huge outcry back in the US that how could you say this about our president in a foreign land? And the impact of that went to the media. Media houses, they were told, you know what? Yes, these guys are topping the charts, but you can't play their music. One radio station one morning received over 250 calls that you must drop that music. This is media, which is supposed to be very neutral, but because of patriotism, and because media does not operate in a vacuum, we represent society, the feelings, the needs, aspirations of the people. The media houses had to comply. So that line, as you're asking, Tom, that line is a very thin line. It cannot be drawn by just everyone. It has to be left to top editorial managers to make the call on where to draw the line.
Okay, let's now look at the electioneering vis-a-vis the commissions that run the elections. When I look at the elections, say for instance in the US, there is very little I know about the commission or whoever runs the elections. It's mainly the players and possibly the politics and you know, how things are running. But when it comes to Kenya, then the ball changes. It's almost unequal. It's almost the politicians and the IEBC fighting for airtime in terms of importance. First of all, what is the cause for that? And secondly, is that the way that it should be, Tom?
I think it's a misnomer to have the name independent on the Electoral Commission, because it is not independent. It should be independent. In my view, those people should have term security of tenure. Say, if you're appointed a commissioner, you stay there for 10 years, and you do your work properly. The problem is that there are too many vested interests, so that every politician wants a person he or she can control in IEBC. There was a day, the late Chesoni, when he was the chairman of the ECK then. So he ran the elections up to the time he ran the commission up to the time of election, 97. So one day he calls us, parliamentary reporters, for lunch. Then he just shoots a question. Who do you think should be the next Chief Justice? So we all mentioned the names. Who, this is better than who. By the time we were going back to the newsroom to file the story, announcement come from State House that Chesoni has been elected the CJ. So it was just checking our minds, what should a CJ do? But because of the vested interest that President Moi had in the Electoral Commission, he could elevate him. In my view, we need a very totally independent Electoral Commission, guys who can make decisions and stick with it. Because right now, I'm sure if, let's say, President Uhuru calls Chebukati, Chebukati cannot say no to him, or let's say Raila for that matter, or even Enoch Wambua here. I'm sure very soon he'll be a very powerful guy. and I'll say I'll share the seat with that guy you see on TV. So I think the vested interests should be curtailed away, should be cut away from IEBC, so that you give them a tenure of office, told this is your job for the next 10 years, do your job.
Okay. Yeah. Senator, your thoughts on why we have such importance placed, even when we're reporting on the commission. Yet their job is supposed to be very well defined. It's supposed to be clear what their job is to do. And then there are certain rules and regulations which are already in place for them to operate by.
I think a lot of these people simply ride on precedent. They ride on precedent because when former commissioners messed up elections, the only penalty was to get them out of office.
Yeah, being sacked. And some of them with very hefty payoffs. Of course.
So if I mess an election, and of course in the process of messing that election, I take home whatever I take home, and you fire me, and when you're firing me, you pay me, you compensate me for time not spent in the commission. Why not? I think Mike, and before I forget, there's something I said yesterday to a colleague in media, that this country where we have come now, I commit this country to two institutions. And if these two institutions fail us, then I don't know. God will help us. The media and the church. Why do I say this? I say this because electoral commissions from time immemorial have perfected the art of creating a larger-than-life image of commissioners, and you ask yourself, the roles of the commission, it is clearly defined in the Constitution. You don't need to redefine it. It's clear. These guys are supposed to conduct elections. These guys are supposed to do a continuous voter registration, which they don't do. These people are supposed to conduct regularly census, which they do when they want to do. These guys are supposed to do civic education, which they never do. So if from history we have learned that the 7 or 8 or 9 commissioners are not effective in executing the mandate of the office of commissioners, why not relook at that mandate and say 2 things? 1, reduce the number of commissioners, because there's no magic in the number 9 or 7. Reduce the number of commissioners. And 2, in the process of hiring commissioners to the IEBC, these people must be people of real integrity. Not just people who find their way in because they were nominated by Enoch and now Enoch's interest must be taken care of. In fact, if you ask me, we must find a way that removes the role of political parties in the appointment of commissioners.
Although right now the suggestion is that we actually have commissioners who are there clearly to represent political party interests, because at the end of the day, the reason why we have a divided commission right now, and maybe that's something that needs to be interrogated by the media, is why is it so divided, is because they're vested interests. And
that's a question that you need to ask Kitonga. You need to ask that question. Political parties dissolve, okay? So I am Wiper, or he is ODM, or you are whatever party you are. So your party sponsors or pushes the agenda of a candidate to be elected in the commission. Tomorrow, you wind up your party. What happens to your interest? Where you go?
Where you go?
Yeah.
Tom?
The guy who you took there will still follow you with the interest. What you said earlier, which I think we should push for, is that what happens to those who bungle elections? If we jailed people who bungled elections, I'm sure nobody would want to do that again. You bungle elections, it costs people lives. And you should be taken to jail. You serve your 10 years in Kingongor committee. If I'm given that job, I'll not dare do that again, because I don't want to be visited every weekend with the Nusumukate.
I think what Tom is saying, what Tom is saying is that it must be too costly.
Yes.
To even think that you can bungle
the elections. All right, we need to wind up in just a few minutes, and I'd like to hear your comments on what has been happening politically. And this, I think, would be put on a headline as the handshake. There's been quite a number of handshakes going on. Let me start with you, Senator, on the coverage, mainly the coverage, not really the content, but the coverage as to whether we have given Kenyans as much information as they need regarding what's happening. Because what we are possibly dancing with is 2022 still having issues if it is not resolved now.
Thank you, Kitonga. And I say that maybe after this, you and I should also do a handshake. It seems like...
It depends on who's shaking whose.
It's in vogue. I mean, everybody is shaking hands left, right, and center. But this is what I want to say about the handshake, especially the handshake between
the
President and Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga. And I say it's a good thing. I mean, when people shake hands and pronounce themselves on peace and unity of the nation, that's a good thing. The only thing that I insist, and I have been very consistent on this, is that that handshake, in and of itself, cannot be said that it will be the cornerstone of the decisions that Kenyans will make on 2022 on who becomes the president of this republic. That decision rests with the Kenyan people. It can never be dictated on them. It can never be influenced by a handshake that pursues peace. Secondly, this issue of handshake, and especially for us in the opposition, in NASA, we want to get the fine details of that handshake and the structure of our relationship with Jubilee
moving forward
inside the house and outside the house. Because this country expects that some people will offer alternative leadership. That's the opposition. We need to know whether that handshake, in a way, dilutes that role, or it enhances it, or what happens. And the earlier that information is communicated to all of us, the better for this country.
All right.
From my view, I think we should look at that handshake contextually. I think Honorable Raila felt he was losing relevance in NASA or something like that. Then all of a sudden he wakes up, announces to the world that he's done a handshake with President Kenyatta. Nobody knows the details. Maybe the two of them, maybe they just met for a cup of tea, but they told us the details will come later. The next time we see, he's going to meet the retired President Kabarak. Nobody really knows the details. But as Enoch here says, people are anxious. Is it a plot to deny Ruto to be the president of the country? And maybe Enoch here is a friend of Ruto, and he'll not be happy if he's not told where
I'm a friend of all leaders.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Enoch. We need to know what are the details.
But now, you're in the media and you're saying we need to know the details. Yeah. Aren't we the ones who are supposed to be providing those details, at least to some extent?
No, that is why I told you earlier, investigative journalists. If the KTN news had a source at Harambee House that day, we would have been told what actually took place. Yeah, what did they eat? Did they have samosa?
All right.
Yeah, the
all right, Enoch, we need to wind down your closing comments.
Thank you, Mike. What I want to say is that, first of all, to condole with the family of the late Kennedy Matiba. That's a man that I shall forever be indebted to. He stood for what he believed in. He never sold out. He was firm in seeking the liberation of this country and justice for everyone. So as the country prepares to lay him to rest, I wish to condole with the family. And finally, to talk to the people of my county, the people of Kitui County. We have so much rain in Kitui. We thank God for this. Just to ask my people two things: to be careful because of the floods, and take advantage of these rains to grow crops to feed our people and to feed this country. Thank you, Mike.
All right, your closing comments, Tom.
As Enoch has said, I wrote a two-page piece for the Star yesterday about Kenneth Matiba. Growing up, I used to go to school in Eastleigh High School. I went to school using Kenya Breweries buses. That was Matiba provided, courtesy of Kenneth Matiba. Later in life, I would work for Matiba at the People newspaper. So that's a guy. I also say a lot of deep-felt condolences, especially to the family, the people I know. Ivy was our MD, Susan, the daughter, and Raymond. These are people I know personally. I feel their pain, but I cannot say that I feel their pain because it's a personal thing. I just wish them, but may God give them peace.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. And that is Senator Enoch Wambua, who are Kitui County, and Tom Osanjo, who's a veteran journalist. And that's where we wind up the newsroom. And